Hi everybody, this is a talk I did 4 years ago. I want to revisit it for two reasons. One, the topic is still timely, and two, ALRDC is having an upcoming workshop. It used to be called the Gas Well Deliquification Workshop and was held in Denver. It's now named the Artificial Lift Strategies for Unconventional Wells Workshop. It's February 11th through the 14th of 2019 in Oklahoma City. I'll be there. If you're around, please join us. You can find out more information from alrdc.org. In this talk, we'll be discussing flow rates past two different types of anchors used in rod pumped wells. We won't be discussing the specific mechanics of the anchor, only the flow rates between the casing and tubing. As you can see here, there's a cross-sectional area. This area is what we'll be exploring in this talk. So what is a hydraulic tubing anchor? It's similar in function to a traditional mechanical tubing anchor that you'd use in a rod pump well. It uses tubing pressure to engage the teeth, whereas the mechanical anchor uses rotation and a screw wedge type mechanism. The hydraulic tubing anchor only uses a piston to engage the teeth. This tool is an anchor only. It doesn't serve as a catcher. If you have concerns about your tubing parting in the wellbore, you should be aware of that. We found, though, that typically when the tubing falls, it's during a workover, and catastrophic tubing parts in an unattended running well are somewhat rare. Hydraulic tubing anchors have been around for some time, but have suffered from design and manufacturing flaws that have caused them to leak. This particular tool has addressed those by tightening up tolerances and thoroughly evaluating the mechanics of the tool. This redesigned anchor, as of 2015, was deployed in about 1,500 wells. 4 years later, that number is about double. This talk is about comparing flow areas in the tubing to casing annulus. On the left and right here, we have the profile of that flow path through the tubing to casing annulus around the anchors. On the left is the hydraulic, and on the right is the mechanical tubing anchor. The table in the middle shows a numeric comparison of the areas, the cross-sectional areas that are highlighted on the left and right. In this particular talk, we're going to use scaled models. Those scaled models were all based on the 7-inch, 29-pound casing highlighted here in green. The motivation behind this talk was to quantitatively compare the two anchors. We observed that the hydraulic tubing anchor had a larger bypass area, but we wanted to quantify that and explain how that actually behaves in some example cases. This talk also came about after a presentation I saw from Echometer, where they determined that mechanical tubing anchors were holding up a fluid level above the anchor, causing back pressure on the reservoir. I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail over the next slides. In an unrestricted wellbore, gas rises, fluid settles around the pump removes that fluid, and the reservoir pushes fluid back into the wellbore. This is how we'd like all of our wells to behave. By placing an anchor in the wellbore, we've created an artificial restriction. In this case, the mechanical tubing anchor creates two regions in the wellbore. Dry gas would typically rise past the anchor without much of an incident. Unfortunately, in an operating wellbore, there's both gas and fluid, and even foam in some cases. This fluid, along with some solids that may have traveled up with it, can settle out on the top of the anchor. This makes the flow path for the gas even more restricted. As a result, gas cannot easily pass up past the anchor, and thus creates a high pressure region below the anchor. As the pump continues to evacuate fluid, the high pressure restricts the ability of the reservoir to replenish the wellbore with fluid. As a result, the inflow is much less than would be expected when the fluid level has reached the pump and the perfs are uncovered. The back pressure is caused by gas in the lower chamber below the anchor due to the fluid level above the anchor. So what about a hydraulic tubing anchor? At the time, 4 years ago, we knew that there was a larger bypass area. We also speculated that the tapered top and bottom sections of the hydraulic tubing anchor would allow fluids and gas to pass much more easily. The hydraulic tubing anchor also has a shorter overall length, which is better for passing fluids and gas in general. In order to test these theories, we devised a number of experiments using scaled models. I'll discuss these experiments over the next couple slides, but basically it involved using 3D printed anchor models as well as a laser cut profile representing the cross-sectional area. Even though we'll be providing numeric results from these experiments, they should be considered qualitative results as they do not exactly emulate real-world conditions. We've made lots of assumptions in these tests, but the general idea of flow rates past the anchors should become evident. The first experiment we did was a simple gravity drain test using water. Measuring gas flows at scale is very difficult on a budget. So for this test, we're going to use water. The general idea is that we have two different areas that we want to compare. If we can maintain a stable pressure drop across the area, then we can very easily quantify the flow rates going through that area. If we repeat that for both the hydraulic and mechanical tubing anchor models, we'll be able to quantify the flow rate difference between the two. So this is basically what the apparatus looked like. We chose 3/4 inch models because that was the optimal size for the flow rate of a garden hose. We then placed the anchor model at the bottom of a long tube and proceeded to fill that tube from the top with water. We then adjusted the flow rate to maintain a constant 4 feet of water in that tube above each of the different anchors. Here we can see the results. The hydraulic anchor passed approximately 30% more fluid in the same amount of time. The next experiment we did was equivalent to a simple hourglass. We used a fine wind-blown desert sand. For this test, we used two-dimensional profile cutouts rather than the three-dimensional models. This allowed us to test the area difference. Here at the bottom of the slide, we see the 4 different profiles that we used. We used the perimeter cutouts as you would see them looking down the wellbore, but we also took the same equivalent area for the hydraulic and for the mechanical tubing anchor, and we used a very simple circle at the center of the disc. This gave us 4 different results quantified by time. That was the amount of time to pass 6 feet of that same fine wind-blown sand through each of the different area profiles. And here's what the apparatus looked like flowing the sand through the 2 anchor profiles. As expected, the larger area corresponding to the hydraulic tubing anchor flowed much more. It flowed the same volume of sand in approximately a third of the time. The initial implementation of this apparatus had the profile discs placed directly at the bottom of the tube. This resulted in the sand stacking out on the disc and not flowing through the orifice. We rectified this by creating a small chamber between the bottom of the tube and the profile disc. This allowed the sand to spread out somewhat and fall more evenly through the profile. While we did expect the hydraulic anchor to flow significantly more sand, what we didn't expect was the hydraulic profile to actually flow slightly faster than the same equivalent area clumped together in a single circle. While the nature of sand, particularly in the form of a column, is not strictly analogous to gas or fluid, it does give us a very good comparison in terms of area and flow rates. I'll put some videos of these tests at the end of this presentation. The last experiment we did used gas bubbles generated by an aquarium stone in a column of water. Here we used the actual 3D printed models placed inside that water column. We initially wanted to compare flow rates and pressures, but we found it was very difficult to come to a consistent threshold between the 2 anchors. The pictures we're presenting here are more qualitative of nature and represent very small gas flow rates past the anchor. Here on the left we have a picture of the hydraulic tubing anchor. We'll notice that a steady state is formed where bubbles rise up one side of the anchor bypass and liquid is falling steadily on the other bypass. We'll also notice that the bubbles below the anchor and above the anchor are roughly the same size. Over on the right we have the mechanical tubing anchor. We'll notice that bubbles are collecting below the tubing anchor. We'll also notice that as the bubbles move past the anchor, they coalesce and slug resulting in larger bubbles above the anchor. It should also be pointed out that the flow rates, the gas flow rates that we used in the mechanical anchor, were much less than the flow rates illustrated in the hydraulic anchor in these two pictures. Following from the last slide, here we have a picture of the mechanical tubing anchor with a very minimal flow rate of bubbles. We'll immediately notice that a slug is formed between the anchor and casing wall. This happened at almost the lowest setting where the aquarium stone would actually generate bubbles. In conclusion, hydraulic anchors are pretty good at handling flows in the casing annulus. The offset eccentric placement of the tubing allows gas to more easily flow. The tapered ends act as a funnel both on gas moving up and solids and fluid falling down. There's no shelf for the fluids to accumulate on compared to a mechanical anchor. And there's larger and more contiguous bypass areas. It's much less likely to cause a restriction in your wellbore. They're really easy to install, set, and unset. I didn't go into details of this, but please feel free to contact myself or one of the folks at Black Gold and we'll provide you some more information on this. Hydraulic tubing anchors are great for running capillary lines due to the large bypass, and there's no need to rotate the tubing to set the anchor. This talk was originally done 4 years ago. I re-recorded it today to go over the general topics. At the time, 2015 was a very low point in the oil market. I wanted to do some more rigorous real-world testing, but market forces didn't allow that. We did run the hydraulic tubing anchor in some wells that exhibited that restriction that was pointed out by the echometer presentation. I don't have any formal data to present on that. Feel free to contact us and we'll share some of the information off the record. We did find that approximately 30 to 40% production increase resulted after the hydraulic tubing anchor was put on. We believe this was entirely due to the restriction caused by the mechanical tubing anchor in those wells. And that does it for this presentation. Hope to see you in Oklahoma City at the ALRDC Artificial Lift Strategies for Unconventional Wells Workshop. Again, that's February 11th through the 14th of 2019 in Oklahoma City. And thanks.